We are 1 week out from the 2022 NFL Draft. Alongside Andrew Gribble, I'm Jason Gibbs. This is the best podcast available, presented by Cross Country Mortgage. This week, kicking off the podcast 1 week out with the best in the business when it comes to breaking down the NFL Draft. His latest edition, the annual copy of The Beast, is on The Athletic. Subscribe today to get your copy of The Beast, which is the ultimate NFL draft guide. The great Dane Brugler, our draft analyst, our resident draft analyst, you'll see him on a number of our platforms over the next few weeks, joins us here on the best podcast available. Dane, we are 1 week out, and yeah, there's some buzz. It's finally starting to pick up a little bit. You know, I think everybody was talking, but it was more background noise than anything else, I think, with this draft. And now we're finally starting to get a little speed here and finally getting a little traction 1 week out from the NFL Draft.
It feels like that's how it usually works. Like we spend so much time talking about the draft, and it just feels like it's a month away. It'll be here eventually. We'll just talk about it. Then one day you wake up and it's draft week. You know, it's just kind of sneaks up on you a little bit. But no, it's still some prep we have to do to figure out how these picks are going to play out. Obviously the Browns not having a first round pick, but then being well represented on day two. Plenty of storylines there, so it's going to be interesting.
Dane, how much did it change your outlook for the Browns with when that pick got traded, and not just this year's, but the next 2 years? How did it change your forecast for the team?
Well, certainly when you don't have a first round pick, we were penciling in wide receiver there at 13 for the Browns as maybe the most likely scenario, and then they add Amari Cooper. And then you think, okay, well, maybe they would go pass rusher there. Maybe you introduce a defensive line, but then when the trade is made, no first round pick, then, you start, your mind shifts towards, okay, Texans now 2 first round picks. Browns are not picking until that mid-second round. What's their philosophy going to be? Do you just kind of sit there and wait to see who falls to you? Would they get aggressive with, those 2 third rounders, maybe move up a little bit in the second round to ensure that they get their guy that they want? So the Browns are in an interesting spot this year as they attack the draft. Still have picks to be made where you expect to get starters, but not having that first rounder. But you know what? If you're not going to have a first round pick, this is maybe the year not to have one. This is a very thin upper class of prospects this year, but a robust middle class. And I think you feel good about the players that are still going to be on the board for you in the mid-second round. So, if you're not going to have a first-round pick, maybe this is the year to do it. Now, we'll have to see future years how that affects this team. Each draft has its own identity. So at this time next year, when we're talking about the draft and how things are going to play out, it might be a different story. We'll just have to see how all that comes together. But this year, especially, having the multiple day 2 picks, I think the Browns still have options here with how they want to attack things.
Dane, I know that you've had some interactions with NFL front offices and been a part of them and whatnot. Have you been in a situation like this before where the team doesn't have a first round pick? And does it really change the team's philosophy as they're looking at draft and how the draft may fall to them on day 2, not necessarily day 1?
I think at different levels, it'll be different. For like the scouts, nothing's different. You're still doing your work. You're still, you're not. It's not like you stop doing work on first round players. You're still doing your due diligence on all of these guys. So from a scouting perspective, from the area scouts, national scouts, that's still the same. Now, from the upper, some of the key decision makers, general managers, some of the directors, maybe there's a little bit of a difference just in how your approach to the draft. But, teams are still doing mock drafts in terms of just trying to best understand how that first round is going to play out. So they have a better understanding of, okay, maybe these are the 5 to 10 players, in the Browns case, especially 5 to 10 players that we really need to focus on. If this guy reaches this point, maybe we make a phone call. If this player that we have graded as, a high second round pick, if he's available here, that's something that will change our thinking a little bit. So it does change your approach, not having that first round pick, obviously. But in terms of the key decision makers, there's a lot more options. If you're sitting there at 13, you have your draft board, you're going to get one of your 13 best players on your draft board. You're also, doing groundwork for potential trades. But when you're picking at mid-second round and that's your first pick, there's a lot more options that could happen, a lot more different scenarios that you could see play out. And so I think you have to just do maybe a little bit more preparation with that being your first pick and making sure that you're getting a good player, especially with it being your first pick and you're only picking the first 2 rounds.
There's 2 positions that Browns fans have kind of latched onto with the second round pick, and it's between basically wide receiver and somewhere on the defensive line. Is this a good year to need those positions when you're starting picking in the second round?
Edge rusher is special. This by far, edge rusher is by far the best position this year. And, it's kind of a broad thing to say it's the best position because you could be talking about, blue chippers, the top guys. You could be talking about, future starters or just overall depth throughout the draft. But I think edge rusher is the answer for all 3 of those. We're going to see 3 edge rushers go off the board very quickly with Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Travon Walker. Probably throw Jermaine Johnson in there as well. A chance to be a top 10 pick. The starters at the position that come out of this group, it's going to be a long list. And it's a position where even into day 3, 4th, 5th round, I think you're going to feel good about some of the pass rushers that are going to be available for you. So with the Browns picking, we have 3 picks on day 2. I think it's a fair assumption that one of those is going to be a pass rusher. And I think they're going to feel pretty good about the options that they're going to have at that point in the draft. Wide receiver, I think, is a little more top heavy, where we're going to see a lot of these guys go early. They're going to fly off the board in the first round. And then early second round, I think we're going to see a lot of receivers fly off the board. And so I think, there could be 10 receivers drafted before the Browns even have a shot at one of them. And so I think it's a position that could be wiped out quicker than pass rusher. And maybe that does affect how the Browns attack this draft. Say they want to come out of the second day with a pass rusher and a wide receiver. Let's just hypothetical, those are their 2 priorities. It factors in, who's going to be available for them in the third. That might affect who they take in the second. If they feel like, wide receivers, the way they're flying off the board, we don't feel good about our options in the third. So we're going to take, as long as the pass rusher and the receiver are pretty closely graded, we're going to go with the receiver here and wait because we feel better about the options that we're going to have a pass rusher in the third. So, I think, to answer your question, both these positions are 2 of the deeper positions this year. They're going to be well represented throughout the first 3 rounds, no doubt.
Yeah, and taking a look at your draft guide, The Beast, which you can get by subscribing today to theathletic.com. You've got a number of guys in that 3rd round and then into day 2, especially in that 4th/5th round, in terms of where you could see some of these guys going. Is there a guy that you thought was a day 3 guy when you started doing your evaluations that you now think falls into that day 2 category that's making that move up the draft board?
Yeah, I think that there are a few, at wide receiver, a guy like Khalil Shakur from Boise State, who, I watched him last summer from his junior tape, and I thought, this is a good player, but doesn't look overly dynamic. And then I don't know what he did, but he looked a lot more explosive on a senior tape. And then that continued throughout the process at the Senior Bowl, at the Combine, through his workouts. And so I think Khalil Shakur could be a guy that goes earlier than maybe I initially thought he would. Calvin Austin from Memphis, another one of those guys. You worry about the size. He's under 5'8". He's 170 pounds. But his speed and how quickly, my favorite thing about watching Calvin Austin is how quickly he turns from a receiver into a runner. It's just such a seamless transition for him. It really allows him to create after the catch and be someone that creates conflict for the defense. So I think there are several of those guys. I mean, Christian Watson from North Dakota State, the receiver, who might go 1st round now. I think so. That's a little high for him. I still think he's pretty rough around the edges. But when you're 6'4", 210 pounds, and you're running them 4 threes, you're going to go early. Teams are going to bet on those raw traits. So Christian Watson might not even be an option for a team like the Browns in the mid-second. But he's a guy that, in October, we were probably talking about him as a 4th round player. but he's crushed the pre-draft process. And, when you just focus on the traits, you start to be excited about, what he's going to grow into, what he could be. Pass rusher, there's also a few of those guys. Josh Pascal from Kentucky, one of my favorite day 2 picks this year. He really, grows on you throughout the process. 6'3", 270 pounds. You love the length that he plays with. One of the best run defenders in this class. He does have, you wish he maybe is a little more dynamic as a pass rusher, but he's a guy that you could leave on the field on any down and you feel comfortable what he's going to give you. So pass rusher, wide receiver, definitely a few of those guys fit that, guys that maybe you thought going into it were day 3 guys, but maybe outplayed that just a little bit.
Dane, in your mock draft, you've got a guy like Logan Hall from Houston going to the Browns at number 44. And then a couple spots later, another guy that's been linked to Cleveland a lot is PERRION Winfrey from Oklahoma. What do you like about those two guys? And what do you think maybe Hall fits better than Winfrey might here?
Yeah, 2 really good players. I think with Logan Hall, he gives you that inside-outside versatility. He was a 3 technique primarily at Houston, but I really like him on the edge. Give him a little bit of a runway, let him use that length, use that quickness, and I think he's going to give blockers a lot of problems. You just don't see guys with that size have the combination of the motor, the quickness, and he's still very young. He's 21 years old. He'll be 22 here actually in a couple of days. But a guy that really could have used a red shirt coming out of high school, but Houston needed him on the field. So he gets out there. He's a guy that's going to help you on special teams. He blocked a couple of kicks in college. I think he's just scratching the surface of how good Logan Hall is going to be. And it seemed like the Browns that they love versatility up front. So, line him up on the outside on early downs, kick him inside on passing downs, bring in another speed guy on the edge, use that NASCAR package and just try to get after the quarterback. That's what Logan Hall can give you. So I like that fit quite a bit. Now, there's a chance Logan Hall could go as early as the first round. I do know a lot of teams, the Bengals at 31, that's a strong possibility. But if you were still to be there in the mid-second, I think the Browns would be all over, or he'd be all over the Browns radar. PERRION Winfrey, he's another guy that's younger for a senior. He's still 21 years old, won't turn 22 till August. Nobody wanted to block this guy at the Senior Bowl. I mean, anybody that was in Mobile and watched those practices, he was unstoppable. Power, quickness, over 35-inch arms. He was a problem for interior blockers trying to slow him down. And did you see that on tape? Not always. He played more of a nose guard in that hybrid 3-man front that the Oklahoma uses. Where it's a lot of slanting. It's a lot of, you didn't really get a chance to, he didn't have a chance to really blossom in that scheme. But when you break down the traits and you see the quickness, you see the athleticism that he has, the power, you feel like this is a guy that is yet to play his best football. So I would be a little surprised if they went with a defensive tackle in the second as opposed to the edge rusher. But defensive tackle is not a deep group this year. And I don't know, you're not finding anyone close to PERRION Winfrey in the 3rd, 4th round. So from that perspective, I think that's why PERRION Winfrey is at least going to be part of that conversation, why he could be in consideration there in the mid-second.
All right. So edge rusher, wide receiver, in your opinion, what's the 3rd best position from a talent standpoint in this draft?
I think I would do it with tiers. So, you've got edge rusher at the top tier, and then maybe that next tier, wide receivers at the top of that next tier. But I think you throw in linebackers in there, corners in there, tackles in there, safeties in there, probably those positions. And then the 3rd tier, I would go, interior offensive lines probably in there as well. That next tier, tight end, who are we missing? Running backs are in there next. And then the next tier, probably quarterbacks, defensive tackles. So, it's the linebackers really deep group this year. Safety, I think the first 2 rounds, we're going to see plenty of future starting safeties in the NFL go in the first 2 rounds this year. I really like the interior offensive line. Center is a really deep group in the 2nd, 3rd rounds. I think we're going to see plenty of future starters come out of that group. corner will stretch out into day 3 where you feel like you're getting a good player. So, I mean, really, besides, I don't think it's a good quarterback year. I don't think it's a great defensive tackle year. Maybe besides those 2 positions, the other ones, I think that they're at least middle of the pack, if not above average in terms of overall depth.
Dane, what can you tell us about the tight end position on day 2 and day 3? Because it looks like the Browns could use another body at a position that they really like to use a lot.
Yeah, and this is a tight end group where we might not see one in the top 50 this year, but 3rd round, 4th round, they're going to fly off the board. That's going to be the sweet spot to get your tight end. And I think this draft has plenty of tight ends that can help your team. Maybe they're not Pro Bowl level players, but you get Jeremy Ruckert in the 3rd round from Ohio State, who is going to be a better pro than college player. Been a little out of sight, out of mind with him because he's had the foot injury that he suffered at the Senior Bowl. And so, no combine for him, no pro day. Same thing with Cade Otton from Washington, 6'5", 250, has not been able to show what he could do. He had, first big injury in his life happened late in the season where he had a foot injury, no combine, no Senior Bowl, no pro day. And then on the flip side, a guy like Jelani Woods, who at this time last year, we're talking about him as maybe a late round pick. He transfers from Oklahoma State, goes to Virginia, has a pretty productive senior year. At 6'7", 250, runs in the 4.6s, low 4.6s at the combine. Outstanding workouts, a pro day, had a nice week at the Shrine game. Jelani Woods has worked himself into the top 5 tight ends this year, maybe as early as the 2nd or 3rd round. So at 3rd round, 4th round, there's going to be a tight end I think that the Browns would be comfortable with, someone that they feel like they could add to the rotation, is going to give them snaps. There's plenty of names this year for a team like the Browns looking for a tight end in that 3rd, 4th, even the 5th round range.
All right. 1st round, Ohio State, Olave, Wilson. Which one would you take if they're both on the board?
I'm a Wilson guy, and I love Chris Olave. I mean, how can you not? But Garrett Wilson, to me, is the best receiver in this draft. And the basic difference between the two, in my opinion, is Wilson is much more of a threat after the catch. Chris Olave is not really going to break tackles. The lack of physicality is something with him that you kind of worry about at the next level. But Garrett Wilson, he creates separation before the catch. He creates separation after the catch. He has a real knack for it. He's not a big guy, but he plays much bigger than he looks, being under sub 5'11", 185 pounds, but he's a long player. He plays really well through contact. And the body control is just phenomenal with Garrett Wilson. So to me, I think Garrett Wilson should be the top receiver drafted this year. But I can understand the thing with Chris Olave too is, he's what you're getting with him. He's pro ready. He's the senior of the group. He's done it a long time. His routes are on an NFL level already. He's wrapped up in clear wrapping paper. There's no surprise when you open him up. So NFL team, and there's value in that. With where some NFL teams are some are sort of looking for an NFL ready receiver. They're not, going to gamble on the traits or gamble on some of the upside that some of these receivers offer. You look at a team like the Packers or some of these teams that are ready to win right now with their situation on offense. The value of being able to step in right away and be an immediate contributor is, and I think Garrett Wilson will too, but Olave is just a little bit further along with his routes, with his releases. You just have a better idea of what you're getting. And for some teams, there is certainly value in that.
Dane, for someone that invests their life in this and is so absorbed in it, what is your reaction to people that say this is either a not interesting draft or even a boring draft? How do you respond to that?
I mean, Hall of Famers will come out of this draft, so let's find them. I mean, every year there's Pro Bowlers. It's the future of the NFL, even if it's a small way, will be shaped by a lot of these players that come into the league. So now I understand where they're coming from. I mean, relative to other years, we just don't have the star power. Aiden Hutchinson, if he was in last year's draft, probably not a top 10 pick, and he might be the number 1 overall pick this year. So trust me, I get it. But I still think there's plenty of storylines, plenty of really talented players. If you're a fan of one of the 32 teams, you need to be interested in this draft, because this is the future of your team is going to be shaped through this draft, through the first few rounds. And like I said, even though the upper class of this prospect pool is a little thin, the middle class is stacked, and that's going to stretch, the mid first round to pick 75. There's not a ton separating a lot of these guys. And so I think you're going to feel good about the guy you're adding to your roster, the potential starter. So there's still plenty to be interested in. I know, for me personally, I'm not a big fan of these quarterbacks, but I can't wait to see where they end up. Where does that run start? How early do they go? What's the situation? Do we see a lot of trade action for these quarterbacks? So even though it's the opposite of last year, where we saw 5 quarterbacks go in the top 15, I'm still fascinated by just how these quarterbacks are going to play out, because they're going to go early. They do every year. Why should this year be any different? But, what's the order? Is it Pickett or Willis first off the board? There's still a lot of storylines worth following.
He is the best in the business when it comes to covering the 2022 draft and the draft every year. Dane Brugler from The Athletic. Make sure you get his draft guide, The Beast, by subscribing today to The Athletic. DB, appreciate the time, and we look forward to seeing you over the next 7 to 10 days on a number of our platforms here as we lead up to the draft and including draft weekend. All the best, my friend. Get some sleep. I know it's easier said than done, and we'll talk soon.
All right, can't wait. Thanks, guys.
Thanks again to Dane Brugler for his time and expertise, the best in the business, Gribs, and dropping a lot of different names and a lot of positions that could be in play for the Browns here next weekend.
Yeah, and don't tell Dane that this draft is boring. He's a believer in this year, so even if it's a meat and potatoes draft, he's into it, and I think, like he said, there's going to be some Pro Bowlers and Hall of Famers, and hopefully the Browns pick a couple of them. But I think the intriguing thing for me is we know there's going to be wide receivers, defensive linemen, which the Browns have added some of those players at that position this week, so you're a little more stocked a little bit in that department. But still, those are probably the top positions of interest for day 2 and day 3. But I'm still intrigued by tight ends. I'm asking everyone that comes on this podcast about tight ends. I think it's going to be a position you want to look at, and there's some exciting guys that have played at a pretty high level at the college level. Like a Trey McBride is very similar to a Harrison Bryant in terms of the production that they've done, and then a guy like Jelani Woods is massive and a great red zone target. So a lot to like in that position, and it's one I'll have my eyes on with the Browns, whether it's late on day 2 or early on day 3.
Well, I thought it was interesting during the combine and through this whole process leading up to the week before here, the draft. Some people you talk to say wide receiver, you can get a starting wide receiver in the 2nd and 3rd round. Others, like Dane, said, there is a drop-off at some point in this wide receiver class, and that edge might be a better bet in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th rounds to pick up an edge rusher.
And this might be the year you have to take advantage of it, because I feel like we've had so many years where you talk about the massive drop-off in edge rushers at this point in the draft. And I think, again, like we've said before, anytime you're drafting an edge rusher beyond the top 20 picks, it's a projection of sorts. But it just seems like this year there's a lot of guys. And I think that's a good thing, because I think the Browns were in a position recently where they could have added to that position, but it just didn't work out in the draft, where there wasn't a lot of talented guys. So I think edge or wide receiver, I think I kind of lean edge in terms of what I think the Browns might do, but it'll all depend on kind of time and place. But wide receiver is going to be addressed at some point here. It just may not be at that first pick.
Yeah, and a defensive tackle that he felt that it wasn't such a great group or a great class or a great year, I guess, for defensive tackles. So if one of the big defensive tackles is on the board, we've talked about it, and even Dane said it himself, he can't envision us taking a defensive tackle with that first pick in the 2nd round, but depending on how the board falls, it has to be in play, I think.
Yeah, especially because, like you said, you may be, and this is maybe a strategy that can lead to bad things, but it's like you look at it and say, well, maybe this guy isn't worth the 44th pick, but there's really nothing beyond this group, but that's a way to get a player that's not of the value that you want at 44. So it all depends. There's a few guys like a WINFREY there, like Travis Jones if he's there at 44, but it's those 3 positions. I think I'd be shocked if it's not a wide receiver, defensive tackle, or defensive end, but I don't know if I would have picked a linebacker in the 2nd round last year either. I don't know if I would have envisioned JOK coming to the Browns in the 2nd round last year. So anything can happen, especially in that 2nd round where all of a sudden there's some guys that you thought were first rounders who are all of a sudden getting in your range at 44 there.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. Don't tell Dane Brugler that it's an uninteresting draft or a boring draft, and I think the same would go for the guys upstairs that are making these decisions. These are some pretty valuable picks, especially on that day 2 front and into day 3 at the beginning. Guys that can really impact this roster and are going to be counted on, I think, to make an impact on this roster.
Yeah, I mean, this is a strong roster at most positions, but these guys are going to supplement. I mean, especially your day 2 guys, those second and third rounders, those are going to be impact players in some capacity, and you want those players to contribute. They're not going to come in and be handed starting jobs, but they're gonna play in some way, shape, or form. Just looking back at the impact of all these guys over the past few years, the Browns have gotten great players in the second round in the last 3 or 4 years. You want to continue that streak and build upon it, because I think we all feel really good about JOK, and he was picked right in that range last year, and Nick Chubb and everyone. I mean, those are second round players are making big impacts in the league all over.
All right, this is also week 1 of organized team activities, otherwise known as OTAs. The players back in the building. They arrived in a snow globe during the day on Tuesday, and back in the building and getting after it. And right now, just workouts and meetings. But that will evolve into a lot more in the coming weeks as well. We heard from Kevin Stefanski. We heard from Amari Cooper. We heard from Jacoby Brissett. We also heard from the newest extended Brown in Denzel Ward, signing a new 5-year extension, Gribbs, and a contract that will keep him as a member of the Browns till 2027. Here's a guy that, grew up playing at Nordonia High School, went on to the Ohio State University, and Cleveland's own. Will continue to be Cleveland's own for the next 5 years. Denzel Ward, deservedly so, getting a 5-year contract extension. And with him, now Deshaun Watson under a long-term deal. You've got Nick Chubb under a long-term deal, Bitonio, Teller, Myles Garrett, and then you brought in some great pieces. John Johnson III is making an impact. Greg Newsome is under a rookie deal for the next couple of years and continues to be that way. Amari Cooper, obviously. And then, what Andrew Berry has done in terms of getting extensions for guys. And his track record continues to pile up. We can't forget Kareem Hunt and the deal that he signed.
I mean, it's all about getting the guys on your roster and keeping them there. And I think that's been a big win for this team over the last few years. You've obviously, when you get to this level, you got to make some hard decisions, like the ones that were made on Jarvis Landry, Austin Hooper, guys like that. But getting your talented players, and Denzel Ward in particular is a great one, just like Myles Garrett, Nick Chubb. When you're able to draft the guys and then extend them, that's how you consistently build a winning product in the NFL. And with Denzel, it really is, when you factor in all the intangible stuff or the off-field stuff, and then you throw in the on-field, it's like as much of a no-brainer as you could think of in terms of drafting a guy high at the time, which people were skeptical about, using the 4th pick on a cornerback. And I think he exceeded expectations. He's coming off what I would say is his best season of his career so far. He's only 24 years old, will be 25 during the season this year, entering his prime, and just a player that he's got great stats, and I don't think the stats do what he does justice, because I think he does a lot of things out there that you don't get traditional stats with, and I think he's got a huge future here, and someone who I think is going to still be playing at a high level well beyond that 2027 where that contract ends.
Well, and again, how impressive now is that secondary with Johnson, with Delpit. You're bringing back Ronnie Harrison at the safety spot. We talked about him last week, signing his 1-year deal. You have Greg Newsome, you have Ward, you have Troy Hill. You've got some other pieces and parts in that secondary as well, and it's a very talented secondary and will be here for a while.
Yeah, and it's an area of the team that really was a big question mark for years, and all of a sudden it's like a luxury to look back there and look at this draft and be like, the Browns could feasibly go into this draft and not take a corner, which is just something that doesn't usually ever happen. But it's one where it could seriously happen. I mean, you could go without even an entire defensive back potentially in this draft. It's a lot of resources from a lot of different avenues, and nailing the Newsome pick, I think, is a huge part of this, because you can have some hits and misses late in the first round, and Newsome for sure is looking like a hit so far, and will only get better as he plays on the same field as Ward. I mean, that just makes life a little easier for him as well.
Yeah, so a big week here at the Cross Country Mortgage campus. Denzel Ward signing that 5-year extension through 2027. The Browns also making a few other moves. Guys that you may have heard of, maybe you haven't heard of, but Isaiah Rochelle, defensive end, wide receiver Javon Wims, defensive tackle Sheldon Day coming back to the football team, wide receiver Jamarcus Bradley, guard Michael Dunn signing their exclusive rights tenders, and Stephen Weatherly, a defensive end. Really rounding out this roster is what this football team's trying to do right now, and signing some guys that are out there on the free agent market. Are they that big A level, B level? No, but they're guys that could make an impact on your roster in the right fit. And I think the Browns are hoping they have found a couple fits here. Rochelle and Wims, both the defensive end and wide receivers, have made contributions in their previous teams. Wims with the Bears, Rochelle with the Chargers and the Colts.
Yeah, and these guys that are going to compete for roster spots. I think you can safely say that for all the players you listed. They're going to be in the mix for spots when it gets down to that final roster cutdown day. I think you simply needed bodies at defensive end. These are two guys that bring experience, and like we said last year, the Browns did similar things last year at this time of year, especially at defensive tackle. You added guys like Damian Square, who was with the team for a little bit. You added guys like Malik McDowell, who ended up making a big impact throughout the season last year. You add these players who, some may make it, some may not, but it gives you a chance, and you set them into a competitive environment, which guys like Weatherly, Rochelle, Wims, they've been a part of it. Day has continued to, I would say, overachieve or exceed expectations these last couple of years with this team, and make an impact and kind of force his way onto the field the way he did at the second half of last season.
Yeah, so I would expect the Browns to not be done anytime soon with making moves and continuing to bolster the roster from top to bottom. We are 1 week out from the 2022 NFL Draft. Thanks to Dane Brugler from The Athletic. Subscribe to The Athletic today and get your copy of The Beast. His draft guide is one of a kind, and he has outdone himself yet again here in 2022. Appreciate his time and his knowledge on the draft itself. For Andrew Gribble, I'm Jason Gibbs. You can like and subscribe today to the best podcast available wherever you get your podcast. Also check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Browns. As I mentioned, for Andrew Gribble, for Jeff McDaniel, I'm Jason Gibbs. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We are back with you on Tuesday, our draft preview show. This is the best podcast available, presented by Cross Country Mortgage.